How did you all get into the industry in the first place? Like, what's your kind of story?
Well, for me, it was acting. Acting's always been the thing that I wanted to do. So, left school, done a foundation at drama school, then went on to the National Youth Theatre, and then after that, got an agent. But my kind of thing was, I found it really hard when it came to acting. It's just, you know, finding the opportunities. There's so many people that want it and that are going for it. So that's what gave me the idea to think, actually, I want to write something, tell a story that's really close to me, and cast myself in it. And that's when I entered short flicks with Blain, and then before we knew it, they were saying, yeah, we want to make a film. So it actually happened. That was yeah. That's me.
For me, pretty similar to Dior. I sort of just performing arts school, sort of that type of stuff, but then I knew that I didn't want to sort of act, and I always sort of knew I wanted to write stuff, and I didn't necessarily know the route to go down, because I was very sort of in my own world when it came to my writing. It wasn't like sharing it with a lot of people, it was just like in my own world. And so I didn't necessarily know the routes to go down. And then sort of with this film, it was more sort of Dior had this idea and I had the same idea, but we didn't even know that we had the same idea, and we decided to sort of literally just go for it, take the bull by the horns, and just go for it. And like he said, the rest is history. Literally, there's no sort of, for me, there's no big sort of story of how I got in. It was literally by accident, and then just learning and just going with it. That's literally what it was. There was no sort of massive story or anything. It was literally just that, just learning and going with it. But yeah, that's it really.
I kind of got into it by, I went to uni in Edinburgh because I always loved theatre, and I was like, oh, I really want to get involved in theatre, and the Fringe happens there. And like Freshers Week, I was an overweight, kind of closeted Muslim girl who didn't drink, and I went to the theatre in Freshers Week. I was like, I want to get involved in this world. But everyone was so like outrageously loud and flamboyant and enormous personalities that it terrified me, and I ran away and didn't go back for my 4 years at uni. And it was only after I left, and the people I knew at uni who had gone through that theatre process and were writing plays and producing plays that were really good, but also I would watch them and think, I could do that. So it was only after that, and I moved, and Edinburgh was a really, really white uni. It was quite sort of exclusively white. And I moved to London, and I was like, I'm going to write a play. So I wrote a play, and I sent it off to a theatre which supports South Asian women writers, called Carly Theatre, and they sort of took me onto their writers development scheme, and then eventually went on to producing that play, and that was my first kind of taste of it. But it really took that really supportive environment focused on Asian women to give me the confidence to do it and to own it and to say, yeah, I can be a writer, I can do this. So I some people don't need that space, but I really needed it.
And I always knew I wanted to produce, so I did an MA in TV and film producing at Royal Holloway, and went off when that was done to work as an intern on Spooks, which was a BBC One kind of MI5 show. And that got me gigging as an assistant at ITV, and I kind of went up kind of through the ranks as a script editor on the Agatha Christie's Miss Marple and Poirot, which is as white middle class as it gets, which was very interesting. And I did that for about 3 years, and then moved to the BBC to work on the continuing drama show, so EastEnders, which is the polar opposite. But I learnt so much more on the kind of continuing drama shows in terms of story, in terms of character, in terms of kind of visibility and what you can do and who you can reach. And it got me excited, because all of a sudden you're telling stories, you're looking at EastEnders with the kind of first gay kiss, and there's things that you know, as a development person, as a producer, it excites you to know that you're reaching out to a large audience and you're starting to build a conversation. So that's kind of how I started more in telly, and then film came later on.
It's interesting here because there's a mix of experience in terms of how you all got into it. I get a sense of, you know, there's more of an academic or structural industry route. There's more of a sense of finding, you know, your community, and there's more a sense of if you don't see the space, you've got to create the space for yourselves. Naturally, in the works that you're producing, and this sounds like an obvious question, but I want to open up the conversation. And I should say this is more of a conversation, so if you do have any questions as we progress, please feel free to put your hands up. But just to kind of like open it up, how important is it for you to center stories that speak to your own experience?
So important. I think Batty Boy is, for us, being, you know, two black gay males that have grown up and not seeing ourselves represented on TV, or just not seeing our stories told. You know, you see the general stories, but there is a big urban black gay scene in London, and we just felt that any time you saw urban London on screen, it was always the estate or the same kind of stories, but within those estates and within that world, there are lots of gay black people that exist. So for me, it's just so important. It will give people watching TV, younger black boys that are going through the same, you know, struggle of coming out and stuff. They will see themselves on TV, and it just gives us a voice. And
yeah, I think for us it was very important that we told the stories of not like necessarily the stereotype of what people. Like when we went into the pitch, I said it. My quote was, "It's not all tight vests and whistles," because literally that's what people think when they think of the gay scene, like tight vests, whistles, flamboyant. And we wanted to show that there's just not every black gay guy is in the arts world. Not every black gay guy is a hairdresser, makeup artist, actor, dancer. Some are just, you know, do regular jobs and do regular things, and some you wouldn't even know. Like there's not a prototype of what a black gay man is, and we wanted to just show that. So like films like kidulthood and adulthood and stuff like that, we wanted to show that there's that, but with the gay world, there's literally that. There's no sort of, it doesn't have to be like the usual sort of mum, I'm gay, you're kicked out now, and like that. We didn't want it to just be that. We wanted to show like there's so much to be said, and that was really important to us, I think.
Yeah, I'm less about sort of telling personal experience, although everything I've written is quite personal, but it's not about telling those personal experiences. It's more about redressing the balance and the like invisibility that has sort of existed up until today. Like if everything I write forever now for the rest of my life features a Muslim gay woman, that is not enough to correct the invisibility of that character in all of history. So that's what I'm trying to do, I think, is create characters. And I want those characters to sit in the mainstream. Why should we have to grow up watching white people and finding ways to relate to them and bridge that cultural gap? When white people never have to work to bridging that cultural gap, why can't they, like, I want to be a Trojan horse in the mainstream and have them making that leap for a change and not me. So, yeah, that's what I aim to do.
It's slightly different for me because obviously I produce, so I work with a lot of writers and filmmakers, and I think what I'm seeing now, and maybe it's a discussion, that there's a lot of pressure on filmmakers, and in terms of not being kind of put in a box and saying, well, you're a gay black man, so those are the only stories you can tell, and you're a Muslim, Asian, and gay, and what I'm finding quite difficult at the moment is talking to filmmakers to say, do you tell the stories that you want to tell, but don't feel the burden and the weight of having to tell specific stories because that's what people want you to do. And I think you know, I think there's a conversation to be had in terms of, you know, it being a creative medium and us being able to really, you know, just tell the stories that mean something to us and reach an audience.
I think that's really interesting because it's like, you know, part of what this panel is speaking to, not just thinking about how we want to see front of camera talent and how the front of camera talent is shaping the industry, but we're also thinking in this panel about like how important it is to redress the imbalance behind the scenes as well. And it's interesting because everyone has different perspectives is what I'm feeling on the panel, because I mean, I guess I don't know if I'm asking a question or making a statement, but do you feel, I guess depending on what your purpose is for why you do what you do, how, you know, are you at that point yet where you feel that the work you want to make can be exclusive of your very direct experience, for example? Or do you feel that, because it's the whole thing of like, if you are a queer person, do you have to always make queer work, you know? Yeah. How do you feel about that? I
don't think you have to, and I think after this I would love to make and tell other stories, but this film, what we've made, is very important to be seen. So for me, I think you don't have to, but for us, this film had to be done and it had to be seen. Yeah. And sometimes what happens, I think, is the people that are telling these stories, they haven't lived their life, they haven't experienced it, so the stories are getting told wrong. So it's really nice to be able to get the chance for us to tell it, and, you know, tell it from a real, raw, truthful place. And I think that's what happens a lot of the times, that, you know, we have these middle-class, rich, white people telling our stories and they get it wrong. And we need more people behind the scenes that can, you know, tell the real story. So I don't think it's that you have to, but I think
it's like the right people
telling the stories.
You know what's interesting as well, because I think this, but let me know where all your heads are at. When, you know, even the idea, even I said it and it was quite leading, but the idea of that, you know, do you have to tell? I mean, I don't even know if the binary of non-queer and queer films should be. I think what we're kind of like, I think anyway, what we're kind of trying to move to is a space where all stories are inclusive. So there shouldn't actually be that kind of gap. So even the whole thing of wanting to make either queer work or work that's not particularly queer, do you think that, I mean, I'm trying to think about what your end games are, I guess is what I'm trying to get to, like, in terms of what do you, in an ideal world, what would you like to see? Is it a sense of not having to make that choice, for example?
That's exactly what it is, I think. I think it's just about telling stories in general, not necessarily queer stories, sort of, it's just telling stories in general, but you obviously have to start somewhere, and so that means, like for us, it meant that we just had to tell this story. But obviously, hopefully, somewhere down the line, there'll be a point where it's just mainstream. Everything's just like merged together, and we don't have to do the sort of, you know, two black gay guys telling the black gay story, or it can just be. But
I feel like within this case, we didn't feel like we had to tell it. We wanted to tell it. And if I wanted to go on a few years later and tell another gay story, then I would. And then if I wanted to tell a story about something else, I would. I think it's just more about whatever kind of writer, director, whatever artist you are, tell the stories you want to tell. Yeah. That's it.
I guess what I was pushing towards is a recentering of the narrative is kind of what I'm getting to in this conversation, which is instead of always thinking from the mind space of sitting outside of the center, the stories can be the center and they can be mainstream and they can be because all people sit within society, like the whole dichotomy of things being different, I think is what I'm trying to get to, seems a bit. Yes.
What I wanted to hello. What I wanted to add to what you're saying, what I'm curious about is what does the panel think that is the reason why queer stories are not centered as human stories. You know, I always make the point to people that the white experience is the one that's seemed like the only experience that's paramount. And even to, sorry, forgot your name.
Rachelle.
Rachelle, yeah. Even I'm curious to ask you specifically about how people in production companies or on that level of producing, BBC-wise, how do they respond to stories that are of this narrative or are very, very niche, or they might seem, because my understanding of it so far is that when it comes to stories like that, a lot of production companies, they're kind of scared to touch it because they don't know what's going to happen commercially or if they're going to get their return and things like that. I'm just curious to know what is the culture around stories of that narrative, because I do feel it's the job of the BBC and people like that to take the initiative to start centering these stories, but it seems like they're not doing that.
It's, with all honesty, I think it's so much better now than it has ever been. And I think that's part because of online as a platform and looking at Netflix and Amazon, you know, and, you know, one of the biggest Amazon shows was Transparent. And so there is a kind of more openness in terms of looking at those kind of niche stories and thinking, actually, well, who's the audience? You know, the BBC, you look at kind of BBC One and primetime, you know, dramas, they're all very similar in the storylines and the characters. And I think it's, you know, it's other platforms like online where they're a bit more experimental in terms of what those stories are and who those filmmakers are. And I think there's a long way in terms of what we see on prime time. But it's getting better. And what I've noticed definitely in-house is, you know, being a lot more open-minded in terms of what those pitches are for drama series and comedy drama series. And that can only be a good thing. But as I said, I do think it's helped because of, you know, the kind of Netflix and Amazon primes that are able to kind of take risks in terms of content.
Sorry. I just want to say, basically, my thing is that, like, obviously, we grew up watching Will and Grace, we watch up growing EastEnders, and all the black families love EastEnders, all the black families love Hollyoaks, all Asian families love Hollyoaks, and they're not Asian. They're not watching Asian people, they're watching white people. So my question is that why do companies or people think that if you center a person of color or a family of color, why do they not think that it would not have the same response from white people looking at them? That's what I'm trying to get at, is like, that's what we do as communities. We watch other white people and we enjoy it, we buy the products, we engage in the stories. I don't understand what is it that they think that that can't happen if you center a family or people of color in the stories.
Yeah, those soaps are getting better though, very, very, very slowly. And shows like Ackley Bridge it centres a gay Muslim woman, I think, and it is delightful to see broadcasters be a bit braver in their programming. It is. I mean, we're not there yet.
Yeah, I think we've got a very long way to go, and I think, like you said, I think they're still scared to tell the stories. And even just through our experience of, like, we're so grateful, and you know, Sky's been amazing, but when we first brought the idea to them, I do think they were scared, and they were worried because they didn't know how the world would take it. And even through the development process, I found that there was things that they were trying to water down.
Yeah.
But
I think they didn't know the world at all, and sometimes like when people don't know, they're not used to certain things or don't know certain things, they just like, then they sort of tend to not go down that route. Like, our personal experience was that in a way we sort of because nobody knew anything about the world that we were trying to create, it was kind of a bonus for us, because then nobody could tell us, like, this is wrong or this is right. So, so we said, this is how it goes. And so you don't tell us otherwise.
This is how it's gonna be. This is what it should be.
So like, there was no one had sort of references. Does that happen or does that happen? It was just like, what we say goes. But But yeah, I think people didn't know, and so like a lot of our journey was educating people along the way, and just little us who were just really inexperienced in this were like educating like these massive execs, telling them like what's right, what's wrong, what we shouldn't be watering down, what we should be watering down, and things like that. Yeah, I just think it's like a lot of people don't know. That's what it is.
That almost makes my question a little bit redundant because the word Batty Boy, I'm Jamaican, and that word in Jamaica just means a big no-no. It's actually one of the words that people actually get homophobically abused with, left, right, and centre, in between and around the corners. And when you said Batty Boy just then, I was just like, okay, I really not really going to get that. But how did they take to actually understand what Batty Boy meant?
Well, they didn't actually know.
We literally went into the pitch and we played them.
We played. I don't know. A lot of you know. There's a song by like a Jamaican dancehall artist, Buju Banton, called "Boom Bye Bye," and it's basically like really homophobic, and it has like we played it in the pitch, Sky Pitch, and they were dancing to it and doing everything like dancing to. Oh, this is great, and then we're like, wait, do you know what they're saying? And then they were like, no, and we're like, okay, well the first line is 2 men in a bed will get shot, and they were like, what? So that's what we were dancing to? And so like so a lot of people like it was we were saying, we're educating along the way, like the people didn't know. One guy, I think he was like I can't remember what he did, like he was like one of our crew members, and he only realized like almost at the end of the shoot what Batty Boy was and what it was like after hearing it so often. He was like, wait, is that sort of like bum and a boy, and so like, and a lot of people were scared to ask, like, 'cause it's like, do we ask? And if we're not part of this culture, should we ask these questions, or are we allowed, like, are we sort of like, let's just pretend we know, okay, I think it's this, like, and so yeah, it wasn't, and which was fine for us because we didn't mind it, like, because it just gave us a little bit more power, because we're just like, okay, well, we can sort of tell everybody what it is. But yeah, they didn't. When they heard Batty Boy, they didn't. I still think even now they don't know what the word.
Or when you say it to some people that know what the word is, they're like, why did you call it Batty Boy?
People of the community,
so homophobic.
People of the community are just like, what? Yeah. Like, as in the black community are very much like, oh my gosh, really? What is that? And then black gays are like, oh my god, like, what is that? Yeah. But then the execs, I think they're just like, oh, Batty Boy, edgy. Yeah. They don't know. I still think now they don't know what we've called it.
A few years back, Stevie K was doing this thing called Batty Boy. I went back to Jamaica for some other country. Actually, I saw that program. It was impossible then. I was so moved by it because as a black gay Jamaican, so I get bullied all the time. It's like, yeah. Then beautiful people actually had that word in there as well, and I just like started to think, is that going to become the nature of a culture of our society at the moment, which I really wouldn't want it to be. I don't want it to be normalised.
Do you know what it was for us? The reason we called it Batty Boy was because growing up and being from a Caribbean background, that's what you get called, and you still get called it, and it's not about glamorizing it. It's about it's taking the power away from the word and reclaiming it, and also showing that this is the harsh reality, and this is what it is. There's no watering it down.
We didn't want to sort of water it down and call it gay boy. Yeah. Just because it sounds better.
No, we get called Batty Boys growing up.
And our film like explores like the homophobia from like Caribbean, and how it's sort of from the Caribbean
music.
And in like Britain as well. And we wanted to just be raw about it. We wanted to say, this is what we're called. And I feel like, I'm generally speaking, but I feel like most black gay boys, or just like people of like, can relate to just hearing that word. And so they would know straight away what it was. And so that initially, that's who the film was for. It was for that person who could relate to this story. Before we saw the bigger picture of how like it could affect a lot of people, but initially it was like, we want to talk to those type of people.
And also, I just wanted to say as well, like, you know, like the kind of the club world and the underground black gay scene that we explore in the film. When you go to these places, these people are dancing to dancehall music, and they're dancing to these homophobic songs. And when Buju Banton, Boom Bye comes on, all the boys are there like, yeah, and yeah, and like dancing and going. So it's almost, that kind of world has already reclaimed it, normalised it.
I think people actually dance to the rhythm, not to the words.
Yeah.
So when I go clubbing and listen to the songs, I dance to the rhythm, not to the words.
Mm.
So when Boom Bye Bye, when so just forget the music, actually dance to what the words have to say. When Batty Boy home to wake and say, yes, I'm a boy and I got Batty, so that's why I'm a So I just break it down and put it back on them. So listen, guys, that's it, take it, go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also about like it's reaching a point of pride where you're like, I'm not ashamed of my identity, so you can say hurtful things to me, you can call me a batty boy. Yes, I am. I'm claiming that. You know, because I'm beautiful and I'm brilliant.
That's the way I see it. Call me a batty boy. If batty boy means two men that are in love, yeah, I'm a batty boy and I'm proud.
And that word doesn't hurt anymore.
It doesn't hurt.
So that we were trying to make it so that word doesn't hurt.
And what, you think you have power over me? No, you don't.
No.
Absolutely not.
It's almost like, you know, you're taking the power out of it, you know, because I think sometimes I think there's a lot of words like this in language where like if we leave them too much to the side, like without touching them, you almost give them a sense of reverence, you know, and you don't want to do that. It's almost like reclaiming the power, taking out the power as well. I think what's interesting about, and I want to ask this question because even myself as a filmmaker, it's a question I always wish I'm asked a little bit more about, but often not asked enough about. So I want to ask this to you all as well. That in the whole conversation of the politics of being, you know, disrupting space, as people like to say that we do, or in the whole politics of being people of color or being someone who's queer, there's that challenge on that level, but I also want to ask you a little bit about developing your creative voice, because that seldom gets asked about, like, you know, how are you as artists, as filmmakers, as producers, like how are you working with artists, and how are you as artists like strengthening your voice, and how are you developing your craft?
It's great that you guys didn't feel any kind of pushback from Sky in terms of your story and your voice, because I think almost everything I've written, I've had a white heterosexual dramaturg usually, or someone who's in a position of power feeding back to me, and often I have to like choose my battles in terms of like what they're asking me to change and how they're asking me to change it, and I have to sift through like what is really valuable feedback, but then also what is coming from their experience of what makes a sort of white narrative work or a white story work that isn't what my story's about. And I find that really hard. That is, and eventually you kind of have to really fight it, or do it their way and be like, look, see, now it's not working. Now it's not working. See, I've done it your way. Now let me go back to my way. And then they kind of believe it actually, and that's very satisfying.
I think we were lucky because we did experience that. But we had each other, so we literally was fighting together.
Like we literally, and I think because we had no experience whatsoever, so it was just like we were going with sort of like a kind of a level of ignorance. We're just like, okay, this is how it's gonna happen. No one's telling us what to do. We don't care that you're executives. This is what happens here. And so, but saying that, we also had to learn that not everything is a battle, and sometimes we had to take a step back and be like, okay, right, this, like, are we trying to provoke people, or are we actually trying to tell a story here? And sometimes it was like, we're trying to provoke, it's called this, or we're doing this, and then you have to, so like, you, like, you do have to try and kind of pick your battles, but like I said, like, because we had each other, I feel like it was so much easier. Because we just fought each other, like, we just had each other's backs, so we're just like, okay. So there was times when literally, like, the emails were so hostile between everybody, and we were just like, but we had each other to sort of, you know, figure out a plan and go. And not everybody has that. So like, I think our situation was like really unique because like,
that would literally come off a Skype, and then Blain would call me straight after, and I'm like, this is what we're gonna do. So I feel like it's nice to, but that's what I mean, just having a team and having a team of, you know, a group of people that all understand your story and know where it's coming from. And sometimes when you're working with these bigger companies, the people you don't have that. It's just you and then them.
Question? Yes.
Hi. I was just wondering what you were saying before about people from a certain background writing about things and getting them wrong. Do you think when it comes to writers and filmmakers, you need to have physically experienced something in order to portray it authentically? Because by that same logic, you could say, well, a gay man couldn't write accurately about a married heterosexual couple with children living that way. I was wondering, where does imagination come into it?
I don't think you have to experience it, but I think if you're telling a true story, it's your responsibility to go out there and do the right research to get it right.
Yeah.
That's it.
Due diligence, isn't
And
it?
if you're claiming that it's a certain story and you're trying to tell a certain story, then that story has to be correct. Depending on what it is, it has to be correct. So you have to be, it's not just like, oh, you know, I'm writing about this and that, but it's literally if, like, for example, if somebody else was to do our film, anybody could do our film. It's not just like because we're two black, it's just that we happen to do it, but anybody could do our film. But it's the fact that if we're going to claim that this is the black gay coming out experience, raw version, then you need to know what you're talking about when you're saying that this is the black gay coming out experience. So it could literally be anybody telling the story.
Yeah, anyone.
It's just you need to know what you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, and like I do a lot of youth theatre, and I'm 31, so not a youth anymore, and clearly have no idea what's going on with them. But because I spend loads and loads of time like embedding myself either as a writer in residence at a school or partnering with a youth theatre company that have a bunch of like 17 or 18-year-old actors that I can spend loads of time with and like show drafts of the script to and be like, right, would you say this? Are people still using this language? Is this an issue for you or not really? Like, tell me your world and like it help me write this. And I think writers just need to do their research, and I think anyone can write any story so long as you have access to people who have lived those stories. So.
There's something about that point, though, for me, that points back to a larger conversation. I personally think there's a richness in, there's a certain specific richness in people who have an experience in making that work. I also feel that there's a laziness that's attached to privilege, and that typically is white male privilege. And so there's a level of people not doing due diligence. There's a level of care that I will attach to, I'm sure, my fellow artists will attach to the work because they are speaking about, writing about, documenting lived experiences. And I think there's another conversation here about empathy, about the understanding of other people's experiences. I feel that people of privilege have some sort of feeling that they have like this elastic ability to cut across. And for me, I feel that it's important for individuals like yourselves to be in the driving seats of these stories until the balance has been redressed. When we have a balance, everyone can tell everyone's stories with due diligence. But until that balance is redressed, individuals like these should be telling the stories. So a couple of questions.
I mean, I think to what you've just said, for me, it's about, are we talking about stories or identities? And not about us without us, and who has the authenticity to tell that. So I just, before you said your point, that's what I wanted to say. And I think I'm also interested in how, as people who have voices that are marginalised, there was something earlier about educating and where we have a responsibility to educate, and why should I be investing energy in educating rather than saying, this is how I want to do it and this is my story and my identity and trust it. And I'm not sure how much energy I still have for educating people. Actually, why is that my deal? And I'm interested in how you strike that balance.
I think that if we don't educate, then we can't complain about things. You can't turn around and say, oh, nobody's doing our telling our stories correctly, or nobody's doing this properly, or nobody's doing that properly. If you're not at least along the way, we were put in situations where we were in sort of rooms with heads of this, that, and the other, and Sky execs and stuff, and I felt like it was our responsibility to tell, to educate, so then the next time they know something. It might not be everything, but they know something, so that when, if somebody else is doing a story or something else, you know, they know a little bit about something. I feel like you can't just say, well, you can, but I mean, I feel like to say that I don't really have time to, or I haven't got the energy to educate, then that I just feel like, well, then don't complain. And if you don't want to educate, then don't complain about your voice not being heard, because you're not doing your bit to teach these people who don't.
I often feel though educating is often in the face of like either racism or homophobia, and it's like, let me explain to you why that isn't homophobic, and that it's it's that exhaustion with like what you're saying is homophobic. Can I be bothered to engage with this like abuse that actually I'm hearing from you and tell you why that is abusive, and that wears me down.
But then I feel like, what's the alternative?
And do you know what it is? The reality is you have no choice but to educate, because unless you want to go independent and find your own film and do what you want, then do it that way. But you know, when someone's funding it for you and giving you £10,000,
and I think it's also
you gotta educate them if you want it.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with the industry,
that's
I
the
think,
problem.
because the thing is this, it breeds laziness. Like, it breeds laziness from the position of privileged people. You're so privileged, go and find out. Like, why do you, dealing with your own traumas, or all of us dealing with our own traumas, have to be the ones to educate white people? We are not the causations of the issue. Why are we educating you about a structure you created? You know, it's very frustrating.
I think there's some people that have the energy to educate. So they have the energy to educate. I think I'm not necessarily one of those people that has the energy to educate. However, I feel that it's our place to, thank you, it's our place to support those who do have the energy. I think that if you don't have it, at least support causes that are taking their time out full time to push and to try and change opinions. I think our place is to maybe help them a little bit. But I haven't necessarily got the energy for that, and I don't think that it's necessarily, it's not our own, we don't have to, I don't think. I think our own thing is to push our own narratives and to push our own views and to make sure that we are heard in our own way. I don't think that it's necessarily, we don't have to think about others or other contexts to try and push that. I think that we just have to be true to ourselves and true to our people and our family, to be honest. That's kind of what I'm saying. But as others have the energy to full-time to lobby and to change opinions, and I think we should help them. I think that's kind of a big
when
thing.
I'm telling my story is educating, like that, you know, let the story speak for itself, and I don't want to sort of speak till I'm blue in the face, but
I also think energy is finite, you know. As much as, you know, we do feel things are very infinite, I think energy is quite finite. And if you have a specific amount of energy, it's best placed for you to educate your people in the tools that they need to succeed, instead of spending your time educating a white person about how they should view your experience. Another thing that comes up from this, you start to talk about, and it's good with looking at behind the screen as well. This all stems from the fact of who is the gatekeeper, who holds the golden ticket, because the only reason why you're having to explain anything to anyone is because they hold the key to the cash, essentially. Because if they didn't, you wouldn't have to do that. Which is why, in terms of speaking about this panel, why diversity is important, not just on a level of in front of the screen, but behind the screen, in terms of who are being able to greenlight productions. You know, if there's somebody who shares a similar identity as you and has the power to greenlight your idea, that conversation is going to be very different to a conversation you'd be having with someone else. I think that's important as well.
I definitely think there's a power in educating people who are willing to invest in you. I don't think you have to educate everyone, but if someone puts their time and effort into your growth, then you should do the same for them, and that way you won't get exhausted having to do it every single day.
I just think people should be given tools, and they can take the tools they're given to find out the experience for themselves. Like, you don't have to break down from alpha to omega, like, what your experience is. You can give people prompts, and people can go out and spend time. And if you care about anything, all of us, if we care about anything, we spend time, you know, learning about that thing. So it's not for, it's my personal opinion. Maybe I should be making personal opinions. But it's not for us to give you from the beginning to the end. It's for us to give you the plot points, beginning, middle, and end. You go and find out everything that happened in between that. You have such a history that's so well documented. We don't have that history. You have a history that's so well documented. It's laid out for you in museums, in art galleries, in texts, in music, in everything. In TV. Explore. If you're curious, well, if we're curious people, if you're curious about something, don't you explore it?
Yeah,
it's not for someone to give you everything, right?
And speak to us in the bar afterwards.
Exactly.
Like, just talk to us.
Exactly.
We're here.
Find our films.
Can I just add? I'm from Germany, so I haven't grown up in this country. So you're obviously coming from a very different place. But I would like to put in a word for an innocent ignorance. There are lots of people who are very open and they just don't know.
Yeah,
and if you just bear that in mind.
Yeah. So many, I love this. I love this.
Hello, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. I'm a very, very nervous sharer, so I hope this comes out. But I wanted to say to the two men, I think what you're doing is so, so important. I work with young people, including young black males who have been rejected by their own community because of their sexuality. And there's one individual I have in mind, and I wish he was sitting here next to me to hear what you've said. And I think what you do, not only is it creative, but it has the potential to save lives.
Yeah.
And this is the point I really want to hold on to in terms of what you're saying, versus whether the role is to educate people. There is something fundamental in what you're doing which we need to preserve, and I don't think it can be replaced. As a young black individual myself, I was stopped by the police in the street and stop and search for things which I didn't do, but this is the plight. And this is the reality on the ground for individuals. Somebody needs to tell the story. It's you guys. I think you're fabulous, really fabulous. I think we need to have more of it. But what I want to challenge is this belief that we can't do it for ourselves has to be knocked on the head. Yes. We have enough capital and cash in our pockets to make it work. We don't have to go begging and scraping anymore. I do believe we do need to be independent. If you want it to be preserved and genuine, we don't need to compromise. If we can give our money to corporations that do not invest in our well-being, we can make a decision to back you guys and say, you know, that £2.50 I'm spending on the coffee down the road can go to you guys instead to make more of those films. Our communities do not need to be financially tied up with any system that rejects us. I say, let's put the challenge to us. 20 years ago, I heard the conversation that we're having today 20 years ago, and we're still having it today. So I will pledge my £2.50 plus to any film-making company that really is going to be a trailblazer, that's going to look to say, look, we're going to do it for ourselves and make it relevant. Our job is not to bow and scrape before anyone. Thank you.
I just want to go back to something that you said, Jen, in regards to if we have a responsibility, and something that you said, Margie, in regards to educate. I'm one of the people who believe that we do. And I say that because as a person of colour, or as a gay person, or anything that you, as a marginalised person, there's a burden you're going to have to bear, that you can't let go. That you know, if you're black, you know you're going to have some certain experiences, and that's it. For me, I'm in a place where I've accepted that, and I've accepted the responsibility that I will have to have these conversations. I will have to. And the reason being is something that you said, is that what I realize is that sometimes not everybody is doing it intentionally. And so even though it's malicious and it is racist, sometimes there are people who just like simply as an organisation, everything that you guys are talking about is what we are doing in terms of just like what you guys said, in terms of building a network where we can support each other. That's why I always work in teams with people. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build mechanisms supporting other marginalised artists to have the support to go up to people and challenge people. And I think that's one of the solutions, and that's what we're trying to do. We're also developing a system of creating our own content and also exploring ways in which we can be financed by the community. So, guys, just make sure you sign up to our mailing list. And that's what I think is the solution. We have, I mean, I don't know what it is, but I think that we as an organisation are exploring different ways of monetizing and getting money from our community. And I do think, to reiterate, I do think it is our responsibility to educate. It's a burden that we have. And we have to bear it, and whether you want to accept that or not. And it's unfair and it's unfortunate, but that's just the truth, you know. And I think that there should be more people going towards the organisation and initiating the conversation and saying, you guys are a government-funded body. You have you guys have a responsibility onto me because I'm a taxpayer as well. I'm a member of the society. So this is how this is how the community looks like. This is what things are in the community, and this is how we can engage. And obviously this is part of our initiative called Immersive Inclusion.
I just want to add to what that, I don't know your name, sorry, you just spoke about the 250. Linda, hi Linda. I'm Campbell X, and with 3 other people, we're 3 trans people, 1 cisgendered person. Kaiser Rose, Nilu Booman, and Miss Kimberly, and myself, we've started Wahala. Wahala means trouble. Some of you might know that slang word. And Wahala, we are raising finance to provide completion funding for queer people of colour filmmakers, because we realised one of the issues was finance and gatekeepers. And we've decided, actually, we're going to put our money where our mouth is and raise finance and work with film festivals and distributors to provide platforms for queer people of colour filmmakers. So if anybody's interested, come talk to me, and we keep your details for when we raise the finance, because I think finance is key, and what you guys and Batty Boy were speaking about is a very familiar story, actually. I mean, I'm going to be talking later, but just to say there is something happening right now. We've got some dosh.
I guess, Rachelle, I'm quite interested. I'm interested on your perspective as a producer, because obviously you're speaking as artists, working with exec producers and stuff, but as yourself working on the inside, if I can say that, like what's your thoughts or experiences with what we're discussing?
For me, I mean, as you say, there's, I'm in the inside, but there's always, especially at a corporation like the BBC and obviously like Sky, there's people above me. So I can develop all the projects I want to develop, but it's whether those projects will get greenlit and on our screens. And I think for me, it's important, there's, my background's in development, so I work with a lot of writers, and for me it's about, nurturing voice and how you do that, and sometimes it's just about being supportive and saying that, there's no reason why you can't tell this story. And just having a really kind of structured framework to do that, and I think sometimes that really helps. But I do think, as producers, I think it's absolutely our job to kind of in development to read scripts, to look at pitches, and to be asking questions and saying, why can't this character be gay, or why does this family have to be white, and to kind of open those conversations, because. I've done it so many times, and writers are like, yeah, why can't they? But it's almost, that kind of default setting where they're just used to writing, again, their experience. But if you don't have someone, in development or a producer kind of raising those questions, no one's going to do it. But in my experience, filmmakers and writers are really open to it. But I do think absolutely it's a producer's job to be saying, talking to the casting director, looking at, the script and raising those questions.
And actually, for a writer, like I've found, I always write brown people in opposition to white people. And now I've set myself a rule of being like, no, I'm not going to include white people at all in my scripts. I'm going to have brown people in opposition to black people. And let's talk about interracial racism. Let's talk about, you know, how a lot of brown people are really, really racist against black people. And what is that about? And let's challenge that. And so that's exciting for me. That happens like in the writer's room as well, I think, not just in the casting room. It's like, well, why should I be only writing white characters?
And this is what makes my point earlier about nuances in there's a richness in your experience, because, you know, we're not monolithic people. We are not one way. We're multi-dimensional. And so this this conversation or that perspective is one that, based on your experience, I'm sure, and based on what you've seen, you're able to write, see and write about. I guess you're all on different levels within your career, but how important is it for you to, because we're thinking, as we're talking about everything here, we're talking a lot about where we are versus talking to people in terms of hierarchy, we can put it that way, who are above, who are allowed to kind of give us access. Are you, although you're at different points in your career, are you thinking about the next generation below you? Are you working with younger people, or how are you, what space are you in on that regard? Is that something that's important to you in terms of seeing others coming? I don't know, Rachelle, if you want to start.
Totally. I mean, 2 years ago I set up something called The Break, which was a series of short films all by diverse writers and filmmakers for BBC Three, and it's something that was an absolute passion project of mine. And also looking at those voices from theatre and playwrights that wanted to make that transition into screenwriting. And so for me, any way that I can, support it, the great thing about, the BBC or as a channel, as a platform, to be able to bring these voices to the mainstream is something that I personally find super important. And any way that I can do that, I will try to do it. It's, we all know it's not easy. There's so many layers that you've kind of got to bash through. But as I said, if no one's going to, if you're not going to do it, who else is going to do it? And I think we've all have that kind of responsibility, that kind of, it's fantastic to be doing what we're all doing, but I think we have an obligation to totally help others.
Of course.
Okay, sorry, I'm just going to have to cut off the panel there. We're going to have
Can I make one last point, though?
Okay.
I think this is what. One last point. This is what's important about, in my mind, and I just want to put this out there. If you find time and space in your busy lives and your busy careers to educate white people about race, I think it's important to find time to help those like yourselves who are coming up to understand the industry and to understand space, because I think that's more powerful in the long run towards where we want to go than the other side. But that's just my opinion.
Definitely, I agree.
Okay, thank you.